Greetings, dear Earth family. Welcome to Ascension Stories. Today we have Stephanie. She is an amazing artist with so many creations. Her whole life is just full of adventure and really just she breathes art. Hi, Stephanie. How are you?
Hey, I'm good, Natasha. How are you? Thank you for the intro.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. For coming on to share a little bit of your story, of your ascension story, and just in general.
My
I
pleasure.
figured when I bumped into you online, I was like, oh, let's talk to her.
Uh,
Very
yeah.
individual.
So I'm sorry, I'm having a little static also here with my audio. I hope that's okay.
Hmm. I think
Can
it's
you hear me well?
yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
think it's fine. We're good.
So yeah, it's my pleasure to be here and share in whichever way I can, to anyone else who might relate to parts of my story or, you know.
Yeah. So would love to hear some stories, some info on your ascension process, your ascension journey. Anything that pops up, and you could have it as broad or whatever works for you.
Okay, well, I guess what's occurring to me right now to say is that I feel like it really is a process of recovering from some sort of amnesia,
Right.
more than of learning. And actually, that's the way I've come to see learning um, generally throughout my life. It's like more remembering. And
I
then,
think
of
it's the
course,
real
maybe.
definition of education. I don't think it's supposed to be like what we have going on now, where it's like this is the information, this is what you have to learn. I think it's more of rem- uh, having whatever information you're giving. It's more so having people remember.
Mhm.
So I think that's the actual definition of or the true definition or the art.
Right. Okay. And even it's making me think like after some difficult parts of my journey where my health suffered or etc., and I found that my brain capacity had slowed down, and when I started to become conscious of that, I started loading up on my omega 3s and this and that, doing my research. And I remember when I took lion's mane the first time, and even cordyceps. But I started to be like, wow, like, the synapses are, they show the synapses reconnect and regrow and like things
Yeah,
that people never thought was possible. And in a way, to me, it sort of lets you see that there is already a pattern of logic built in, and it's really up to us to fall into line with logic as opposed to creating infinite logics that are not logical in the end, that are dead ends really, in a mental maze. It's like, okay, that's fun, but I gets really tiring when things don't work, you know so in the end, I think we're worn down by things not working, and you just want to fall in line with something that's going to give you continuity, and growth, right? So you want to find the right foundation that gives you a house for life. But I remember as a child having I remember being some of my first childhood memories of like being very connected with the sun. The sun was like a very important thing for me. And I remember traveling with my parents in the car, and we'd go on long trips to Quebec to see my family. And I remember sitting in the back and going through this thing of like letting my mind go up levels. Like there were 9 levels of cloud levels. That's how I would call them and see them in my mind. So little things like that I didn't have any particular meaning behind, but I remember those things. Also, like, playing magic potion. Like I didn't even know how to read, but I would, put hand soap and lilac leaves and whatever, and rub them on my arms. Like, okay, we're gonna fly now, guys. Things like this that, and I was born in the 70s. Like, it wasn't like I had uh, a bunch of YouTube videos to go look at, and cartoons galore. Like, at that point, we had, dial TV and like some Saturday morning cartoons every once in a while. But other than your books, you couldn't really make that stuff up so easily as, uh, or you know what I mean. You couldn't get references for those kinds of things so readily. Um, but anyway, all of that sort of, you get embroiled in life and being a child, and seeing where you fit in. And really, in my childhood, I just, wanted love and acceptance. I think that's pretty much the MO of every child, though I shouldn't say that generally, but there are all different kinds of creatures. Um, but then when adolescence hit, and you have these, like, it's a transformation. I think like 12 years old was the year I got my period, and was the year also that something changed in my perception. Really, there was like a very clear change of who I was, I think. And from there, it's like the shadow starts to permeate through, and you have a different vision, a different connection. I felt connected to nature in a different way. I felt drawn to darker things, more hidden things, and all that started to open up. And by the time I got to high school, I had completely dropped dancing that I'd done my whole life, and I went into drawing, and more kind of more in my inner world, and questioning, and feeling dissatisfaction, and being critical, critical of what was around me, in a way that uh, can be unhealthy, but is very healthy and necessary, because we must ask questions to get answers. And if we don't even know there's a question to be asked, then we're really kind of following blindly, so and that's when I really started to be like, wow, I'm in this school, just things just weren't adding up the same way. It's just, I wasn't just following blindly anymore, and I started to make moves at that point. Like, I understood, first day of grade 10, I was like, I must get out of this system, but I didn't want to just drop out. So I just found out the quickest way to get through it using night schools, and like the minimum amount of credits I needed, and, just trying to do it in a way that it wasn't like, I wasn't rebelling. I was really just trying to, find the quickest way out. So, and then of course I did. I went to another semester at school and had more arguments with teachers about things that made no sense, and I ended up dropping out at that point, But I still got whatever credits I needed. But I was not attracted to the whole school system, because it just did not make sense to me that I was being judged and graded by people who didn't seem to really, I don't know, anyway.
I know.
So we all have our unique versions of that tale, but it's like, I was like, I think that what I learned was exactly what I was meant to learn, through those observations, and etc. So, but it wasn't then, then I got into a more serious relationship, and also moved away, or came back, ended up going to Montreal, was getting into music and was producing music, and all that stuff was going on. So I was in my creative world. I had like found a good bar job in Montreal. I was making good money, rent was cheap, I could focus on my creativity, etc. But towards the, then I had some upsets in that, being betrayed, and in with music stuff, industry stuff, and just disappointments, disillusionments. And in that same period, again, like going towards my Saturn return, I really then, wow, it was like a storm, a major storm hit. And yeah, I'd been going through my rabbit holes, and people came into my life that opened my eyes to certain things. and but it's just like investigating online while I was like waiting for mixes, or like while I was working on my music, I would then like go over to the internet and start going down rabbit holes and like, oh, what is this, and but nothing that would change like the course of my reality, but that was expanding my mind in terms of possibilities. Like I was being open to different possibilities than narratives. But then, I ended up, going like vegetarian, vegan, like overnight, doing my first like herbal cleanse, overnight, seeing this psychic fellow overnight, and it's just like the synchronicities, the connections that I was starting to have with my inner voices, and or external, who knows, but like invisible voices, and different things that were happening was just like, whoa, it was just like all at once. And also my intuition that I was kind of had enough with the kind of world that I was living in. That was a society being very isolated in the winters. I was living in Montreal, just working on my music. People being a little bit cold in their demeanor, than just being in a bar when people doing coke and getting drunk. Like it's just like at the end, it's like, well, there's definitely has to be more to it than this. I started having a very strong intuition that I had to move to Spain. I had no idea why, but circumstances developed, and I ended up in Spain, and I walked the Camino de Santiago. It's a pilgrimage across northern Spain. Actually, it goes from anywhere that people want to start it, but it's most known for beginning in the Pyrenees in France, and you walk all the way to the Atlantic, through Galicia in the end. And that month of walking ended up being determinant in me moving to Spain, and actually, uh, and more than that, it shows you Providence, how Providence functions, that you have nothing, but everything you need comes to you, in a microcosmic way that we can then apply in our lives and see very clearly, etc. So after that had happened, and also my mother had recovered from she was in remission from cancer. Like, it was another huge upheaval in those years. We thought she was going to die. She ended up, they misdiagnosed her, and we had that miracle of thinking we were going to lose her and having her still be with us. So it was just like a lot of emotion, a lot of madness, and a lot of synchronicity, synergy, and what will qualify as magic until we can define it. So then I ended up moving to Spain, and it was a very different type of life. um, and I would say I wasn't in such an intense, um, like psychic uh, opening at that point, because now I was focused on other more ground matters, like learning a new language, and hustling my way through a new chapter, and where visual arts had come back after these music years. And I was painting and drawing a lot, and still singing, and still doing all the things that I do. But it was definitely a chapter where the visual arts came back strongly, and I would say that the psychic understandings and the evolution on that front started to come out in my art very strongly, which had begun in Montreal before, but it was more about the art being the manifestation of the ascension process. So yeah, then moved to New York, and that was a couple of years of intense painting. I had a vision that led me there. Um, Never had anything like that happen quite so clearly, but ended up living in an amazing circumstance in Soho for a couple of years. A lot of painting, and then really, really like the opening became that much more powerful. And my roommate at the time introduced me to this seed called Syrian rue that you use with mushrooms, with uh, magic mushrooms to create shroom waska, or there's another word for it, silly waska or something like this. Anyway, um, and this was the beginning of a huge, huge breakthrough point for me. And it really came to me and opened gateways. And next thing you knew, I wound up at Burning Man. This was 2008, and I just pretty much every day, pretty much took it every night and walked through the desert and had my conversations with the universe and whichever guides have been with me, and you know, it was that thing of being on the tightrope of having nothing and really, really having to embrace the concepts of providence, not only at Burning Man, but in those years surrounding it. Very, very much so. Just following the inner compass. That is, you know, I was thinking about this the other day. I say it's counterintuitive. It's not counterintuitive. It's actually completely intuitive, but it's counter logical. You know, it's counter the logic of our world. So a lot of people have problems with that. You know, a lot of people are going to feel disrupted um, by you following your heart and your what you know you have to do for yourself. And I was very fortunate when I did those things when I was a teenager to have parents that allowed for me to do that. I didn't have to rebel in that sense. So very, very fortunate on that front. You know, they had already lived their own lives and knew that it wasn't going to be fruitful to try and like dominate. You know, they were very supportive. Um, but yeah, I think that was a difficult thing on that front, was not knowing if my friends. I actually, even when I was in Montreal at one point, I stopped drinking. You know, towards the end of those years, and I remember thinking like, will my friends still be my friends if I don't like go party with them the way I used to? You know, and just the fact that I would have that thought was kind of something. But in the end, of course, they didn't. You know, they were my friends and they loved me however I was manifesting. But
Just
actually,
just curious,
sorry.
why did you stop drinking?
In those years, oh well, actually, I drank quite heavily. You know, our friends. I don't know if it's the Irish side or what, but we would like drink to blackout, you know, and that was just like another night. Like no one was calling anyone out on it. It's just like, yeah, you drink, you know. And one night I woke up in the morning in my apartment. Like, you know, I managed to undress myself a little. The door was wide open, keys in the door, and I caught my reflection in a painting. It was like in the glass of a painting I had in my living room, and I heard a voice say, "We expect more from you," very sternly. And I turned bright red, and I was so embarrassed, and I stopped drinking right after that. Yeah, it was really sudden. It was, but it had to happen. Yeah, it was really like, what am I doing? You know, just going through the motions. Yeah. So, and that was in that same process that I was talking about at the beginning of my close to my Saturn return. So all of this came together. It was like a real like moment of, it was just like change, you know. But I'd say it was harder when I really started being true to my spirituality and what that meant with my instability in the material world, that people had a very hard time with that. That you don't drink doesn't really, you know, but being broke or being like, you know, on the wings of what is of Providence, that can be very frightening for people, you know, because then they think, oh well, will you be dependent on me? You know, if I let you in, will you ever leave? Like, you know, it's not like that. But I think that it shows very much the kind of world that we're in. Also, you know, it's like,
I feel like a lot of people wouldn't know what the definition of providence is.
okay. So, you know, when you have a need that is fulfilled in a way that is like divine, unexplainable, like it's like you're thirsty and someone just walks up to you with water, it's but in every sense of the word, and we all live it, but can we identify it? Sometimes it has to become so clear for us to really see what's happening. I don't know, my rent's due tomorrow, and then you get a call, and someone offers you like a job with an advance, you know what I mean, something like that, it can happen in a lot of different ways. It can be emotional support, it can be of any type, but it's really something that comes and
Your needs being met.
hooks you up. What's that?
Your needs being met. That's it.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so I guess the thing is, I feel for myself, and I think that this is part of the process, is that if you don't know what it is to have nothing, you can't experience the miracle. you know if you're not in a situation of where you see no other solution in the world that and then you discover a solution that is granted to you in that way, you start to see life differently. You start to understand it differently. And also, I think that it's important for people um, to know that money is just an expression of providence. It is not providence in itself. Like the relationship with the material world. In order to be in a spiritual understanding, there has to be the counter understanding. So, as amazing as it is to have the experience of building in the material world, what about building in the spiritual world without the material? I mean, the material is still there, of course, but not in a way of like, not in that traditional sense. It's there in that providential way where then a lot of people will talk about manifestation and things like this. So I have my own, viewpoint on that, because I believe that an energy, like I was saying before, about there being like a pre-established logic that it's up to us to fall into, as opposed to recreating the wheel in a million different ways that may not work as well as the actual wheel. How could I try a wheel with an extra like triangle on this side that at the end of the day, life already knows we are built on a system, and I think in terms of co-creation, it's more of becoming a limb of the creation, becoming a vessel for the creation, as opposed to becoming another creator, like because unless you have your completely distinct system that has nothing to do with the one we're already in, which I don't know how you would be in it. So I don't know, but ready to have my mind blown at any time, open, like, don't know all of the ins and outs by any means. But so when it comes to manifestation, I feel that I prefer taking the stance of allowing for the universe to do what's best, as opposed to thinking that I know better than the universe and trying to impose something on it. It's like, oh, I want to have this car that looks just like this, like that. And I know people, they do this kind of stuff. And it's amazing. And I think it's a cool exercise. And if it's in your path to do so, then it's definitely part of your learning journey, regardless, but the way I see it, I'm like, yeah, okay, well, now I'm going to manifest this car, but like, what if it turns out to be like I have no parking? Like, what if it turns out that like all of a sudden like I'm stuck with this burden that I think that I'm doing myself a favor? So in the end, I'm just like, I just feel like the most efficient way to manifest is to take your foot off the gas, and just allow for life to bring you solutions, and that way, my manifestation will be to let life do something for me that I would never have been able to imagine. Because I don't want to have a life that I could write. I want to have a life that I could never write. I want to have a life that I could never imagine, and I would like for those things to keep going, so that, if one day I'm conscious on my deathbed, I can say, that was a great story. That was a great movie. Not unhappy that I stayed till the end. So yeah, those were the earlier years. And then I went to Brazil after New York. So after that chapter of not having of this thing of being kind of in a discordance with my environment to a certain extent in terms of the material stuff, of me being like, yeah, I'm on the wings of Providence, what can I do? Like, I try and do things the way other people do them, but they never work. I have no choice but to just surrender here, and surrender to criticism, and surrender to everything that surrounds that process.
Sounds like your path.
And I was in New York. I was staying with a friend of mine in Brooklyn, and it was starting to get cold. I could see the same thing that happened in other chapters before, like businesses closed that I used to frequent, or like the set was being torn down. You know what I mean? A little bit. And I was like, I just said, oh God, you're not going to make me spend another winter in the cold, are you? And literally the next day, my ex called, and he's like, he had bought a boat in Brazil, this crazy pirate ship that he had sort of left there with someone on my advice, because I'd been there. Actually, when I bought my ticket to Burning Man, I was in Brazil, in this crazy situation, didn't know how anything was going to happen, but I was like, I'm buying this ticket, I'm taking this like $150, or I think it's like maybe $95 at the time, a ticket to Burning Man. And I was like, well, I'll get there the way I get there, and the way I got there is a whole podcast in itself. So we'll just say I got there in a very magical fashion. But anyway, so he had bought this boat, then he had left, and so I was the one who was going to go back to Brazil and sell this pirate ship for him in a town that was, the first capital of Brazil, called Paraty. That was actually was a town of pirates. Like, they had to move the capital because there were too many pirates, and they're still there. Okay, buyer beware. Anyway, so that was a very interesting chapter. At that point, post Burning Man, post my enlightenments with the Shroomwaska, post this incredibly, like, this chapter was getting like very synergistic. Like, wow, I was seeing like cracks in the matrix. It was like, it was heavy at that moment. And Brazil, and where I was, Brazil is so charged energetically. It is like some different place, and it was like almost too much for me. Like, I could, I was starting to see things. I was starting to, I was channeling a lot of information about the shadow, just a lot of conceptual stuff. And actually at the time, what I wound up doing is every time I would get downloads, I would look them up on internet to see if I could find some information about what I was receiving, not the other way around, because I didn't want to color what I was learning, and it would always come up with Carl Jung. He was the one who would come up. So I was like, okay, interesting. I'm on a track with this man here. And then when it was just getting really, really intense, I was living, it's kind of like rainforest and on the ocean, a lot of islands, and very beautiful place, very, haunted place, a lot of history there. And a friend came up to me and he said, hey, Stephanie, I'm going tonight to a candomblé meeting. Candomblé is like the Brazilian, like, Santeria, or like voodoo or whatever, like the equivalent of like, but candomblé, they only deal with the high spirits. They don't deal with the lower spirits at all. But where I ended up going, so I went out with him to the jungle to this, session. And it turns out that the Pai de Santo, so it's like the father of the house, he had been involved in another school before that did deal with the lower spirits. And his Pai de Santo, his
Now, lowest spirits mean darker spirits, and higher spirits mean the light. Just to double check.
Yes, And it's just like the higher spirits are almost like conceptual spirits that stay in the higher realms, that they govern over the ocean, they govern over the lakes and the rivers, they like over nature, and they're associated with certain things, whereas the lower spirits
Elementals.
have the power of interference, basically.
Oh,
Like they're more earthbound, and they issue, like they will come, and so in those schools, so it's called Umbanda, was the name of this other school, they can do interference work. So basically, if somebody comes and says, "Yeah, I want you to like mess my neighbor up," they will do that, you know. But in Candomblé, they don't do that at all. Like they don't operate with interference.
oh,
So, but because he had been part of this school before but was operating in the light, he allowed him to keep channeling the same entities that would come through him. So in the higher schools, they only channel the high entities. They have like special clothes that they wear and cover their eyes, and they will dance, and they will incorporate the higher entities to bring these higher energies down. In the other school, you can have conversations with like these lower entities. So they have different ones, like caboclo, like the it's kind of like a man of the country, sort of, who smokes. Then you have the gypsies. That's where I started to learn about all of this. So many people carry these gypsy spirits, and he did also. He would incorporate a gypsy. Um, there's different ones, like up the 7 crossroads, Sitchin Crucilladas. Anyway, it's a huge tradition, you know, and it's extremely known and practiced in Brazil. Um, and so he incorporated his gypsy in this session, and I was just like, I just started to tremble, you know, and I went into kind of like a little bit of an ecstatic trance or something like that. Anyway, I had a reaction, let's say, and I ended up going back, and he read my shells, and it turned out I shared the same saint as he did, and that his Pai de Santo did also, which is Oxalá or Batara, which is like the Christ saint. It's blue and white beads, if you ever see that on. And I kind of got, because of the numbers, my numerology and my shells, I sort of got like a little bit of a green card into, like, I didn't have to go through certain initiation processes that other people have to go through to be in certain ceremonies, or et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, it was just a very important part of my of those times, also because like there would be ceremonies, and what would happen for me is that it would turn into information. I would register ceremony as like data, and I would start to have like downloads of concepts and etc. So at a certain point, though, I broke away because I felt that it had an energetic hold on me, that I was like, okay, well, I need to emancipate myself energetically. But it was very necessary for me to have the grounding that I got there, I think, and met some beautiful people and had really special experiences, like meeting all of this school. So the Candomblé, it's the house that they were attached to came from Bahia in the north, and it was the first house that came from the original Nigerian line. So it's from a Nigerian religion. You know? And I ended up going to Rio, meeting all the higher ups, these beautiful women, everyone in white. It was very magical, very, very beautiful. And I had a really nice interaction with one of them. And my Brazilian at this point my Portuguese was what it was, you know. I ended up picking it up quite well with the Spanish I spoke, but at that time, like, the gist of what she was saying really was like, there's one thing to remember always. And she said, humility, humility, humility. And that will stick with me always. You know, this is not a thing of hierarchies. It's not a hierarchical thing. You know, it's, just play your part. You know what I mean? So to ground the ego in that, so
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I was on mute, turns out. Yeah,
Yeah,
I was saying absolutely humility, humility, humility. Get over yourselves. Like you said, we're all here just playing our part. We're just pieces
yeah,
of the whole. Get over yourself.
yeah. And if you don't, you're just gonna attract flies to yourself like a flame in the night.
You're gonna
you
crash
know
to the ground eventually. So,
what's that? What's that?
and you'll crash to the ground eventually. If
Right. Yes. And that's part of it too, right? That's part of the process, So she was giving me a heads up though.
no wrong, there's no right. You'll learn your lessons.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, and then I met a Cuban guy when I was down there that I ended up living with in Rio. We were dating, and he had grown up in Santeria, so I got even more like uh, I don't know, I guess informed through experience, because it's not like you're sitting at a desk and taking notes, you're just like living
Right.
stuff, and I would say that almost that kind of like symbolic tradition of ceremony and stuff, it related more to that stuff I was talking to when I was a child, like that feeling, so it's like it's not this intellectualized, compartmentalized, dissected and put into blocks that then are moved around in like erroneous ways. It's something more, outside of language, um, but very much linked with nature and metaphor, you
Yeah.
know. So then with him, so I wound up moving to Rio. He was living in a ruin of a mansion on top of the hills of Santa Teresa in Rio that a friend of his had acquired to turn into the first 6-star hotel in Rio, which apparently it is now. But at the time, it was a ruin, and it was beautiful. It was a beautiful ruin overlooking all of Rio and the Corcovado, and you could see all the beaches, and it was incredibly magical. Like, the kind of stuff that can't happen to you if you have like, barriers, like, in a way. I don't know, just like I don't know. Anyway, it's just some crazy stuff. And we threw parties there. He was a musician, so that brought me back to my singing. And I had wanted to move to Rio anyway because I wanted to be in a bigger city for my art, to keep doing what I do. Even though at this point the boat, I had traded it for a condo, and like at least I got it out of the water because the pirates were trying to dry me out and steal my boat. So I got my whole like MBA in pirate law, and I was in this like Masonic, like historic city. It was just like wild. Like this place was, again, like New York, a never-ending box that just like open can be anything. You think you're done discovering, and no, there's another crazy door, another trap door. So but beautiful memories, beautiful times. Of course, at the end, before moving to Rio, I was completely broke. I was like, thank God for bananas on the trees. Like, um but yeah, so I went to Rio, and then eventually we had to leave there, and we went to see John of God, who has recently been incarcerated for, for being a bit of a sexual predator, But do you know John of God, Natasha?
No.
He's very, very famous spiritist in Brazil. Actually, Oprah had profiled him, and like
Oh,
I had been there when I was in Brazil in 2008 also. And so I was like, well, let's go back there for some healing, because like the energies were really crazy, and there was a lot of stuff going on um, around us. So, but that wound up being, I mean, it was always good for me when I was there, but it wasn't so good for him. And anyway, but regardless, one day, so I went, you line up with your queries, and I went to the entities, and I said, I have a condo that is wrapped up in like a crazy story that I'm trying to like, get off my hands. And oh no, oh yes, it was a condo by then. And then I said also, my music, like my music has always been at my core, and I was like, how am I gonna do this? Like, how is this happening for me? The next day I had 3 offers on my boat, on the condo, sorry, that I traded for the boat. One of them came through my own lawyer, so I went with that. And we got offered to go sing in Morocco at a Brazilian restaurant in Casablanca. So that's what ended up happening. No auditions, no thing, just like, oh, a friend told me, and there we were. So we were like, okay, well, we have no other options, and that's how my life has worked, right? No other options. So you just like go with what shows up, and it ends up being what it is. So next thing you know, I had finally unloaded this condo, though like it wasn't without its difficulties in getting the money. And then we were in Casablanca. Yeah, and so that was another crazy chapter. I had some health problems over there. I got pregnant, lost the baby, had a kidney infection, and even though once I was at the end of that and had gotten all my treatments and whatnot, I was like, okay, well, I'm back, let's do this. But I had already decided that I was going to go to Canada and stay with my parents for a while to heal. So I went back home, and then I had a huge trauma when he ended up, the guy that I was with ended up getting his ex pregnant, and something that was obviously not meant to be was forced not to be. And I was devastated, and it was clearly a blessing in disguise, or not even in a very big disguise, but it was clearly a blessing that our ways part. But it was still absolutely devastating, and it really sent me into like a sensitivity that I had never known. And that was a huge part of my ascension process that occurred then, because it's like it became so clear to me how trauma is an opening, not a closing. It's like it's an opportunity to go into your depths, into whatever happened the last time you were in such a trauma. Like, and the bigger the trauma, the deeper you go. So it was an opportunity to be seized, to dive into the underworld, and to get as much information and have as much sort of equalizing occur. Like, I don't want to say healing, but it is in a way, and then I was using Bach floral remedies that maybe like a few years back I wouldn't even have felt them, but they were so powerful while I was in that state, while I was so sensitive, that it became very obvious that what was going on, to be able to navigate in your perception through these kinds of psychological experiences has been just invaluable, and really, really allowed for me to understand life in a different way. So, and that's also where I started to really go more in depth with the tarot and understanding, because I had so many questions that had no answers. And that was the only way I could find them, was either intuitively or by using the cards, and I started to deepen my understanding of and my knowledge of the individual tarot cards during that process. So, and then it took me about 6 months. Oh, I did a Vipassana 10-day silent retreat also during that
By the
time.
way, I think you were the first person to ever do or introduce me even to tarot. I don't think
Really?
at
Oh
all.
yes, I read your cards at the bar. I remember.
Yes.
I remember.
I was so excited. I think you had told me you would, and then I just couldn't wait. I was like, ooh.
Yes, just with my app. I just did it on the phone. I remember that. Yes. I still have that app.
Got an app myself now. I got an
Yes, yes.
I got an oracle.
Yeah. Yeah. For those moments where I'm like, should I buy the red shoes or the blue shoes?
When it comes to questions that I'm like, I have no idea how to choose, and it could be really technically about anything, and it could be really important life decisions. I feel like the divine will produce it through whatever. So I'll do something like flipping a coin. Why does it matter?
Yes, yes.
But divining is divining. Speaking of divine is
Absolutely.
divine. So it's like,
Yeah.
so like for example, choosing an acupuncturist. Like months ago, there were two choices. I'm like, I don't know either of them. How do I choose? And I'm like, well, instead of just kind of blah, let me just. And I'm pretty sure it was the correct move. But there's just
Right, right. That's something else that I from my childhood that I remembered. I would do that with like throwing balls of paper into like a wastebasket. If I get it in, it's a yes. If I don't, it's a no.
exactly,
Stuff
and
like
it doesn't need to be like a coin. It could be what you just said. Out at the bar, at that particular bar, I used to flip coasters because like I
that.
don't
Okay.
anything that's like one outcome or another, literally. So like I'll literally like wherever I'm at, and I don't have a coin or any like just anything. Like at some point it was like a leaf, just like random stuff. Like I don't know, like
Right.
it'll be
Yeah.
what it'll be.
Totally. Exactly. And if you find it that you're not like that, you don't like the answer, well, that's your answer too. You know what I mean?
True.
We will go where we will go, and do what we will do. But like, I think it's just important to remember that we're constantly in flux. We're never the same person. From one day to the next, we're not the same person. And there are moments where we have experiences that are highly, highly, highly spiritual in terms of our sensitivity and our disconnection from the material world. And other moments where we'll have the exact opposite experiences, and it's just that our environment is a huge part of what we are, because that's the entire circumstance. What we choose or what we end up doing in those circumstances, that is the remnant of what we add to the equation. So it's not really a question of judging who we are, but like, under what circumstances are we what we are, and and that's something that has been brought up very much in the last 2 years. What are my values? Like, what is it that's at the core of my decision making, no matter the circumstance, no matter the level of sensitivity that I'm exploring? But like, what is it that's really, really important? What is my core, regardless? What is the unshakable thing? And if there is nothing unshakable, well, that's the first thing that will be constructed, and from there everything grows. So um oh yeah, right. So those sensitive years, yeah.
Yeah.
So after that, I came to New York, because when I left, I had gone to see him in Brazil, and I was like, I feel that I have to go to New York. It's just like, I really, really just feel that I have to go back there, because for my art, my music, it's the most relevant. It's the biggest city close to, I was born in Ottawa. My family's in Ottawa, Canada. So it's like a 9-hour drive close to my family. It's the biggest metropolis, and it's uh, culturally relevant for a person who's writing music in English and who's, whatever. I just wanted to be, okay, I'm in Morocco, okay, I'm in Brazil, but, culturally, I'm not so relevant in those areas. I just wanted to feel a little bit more in my element. And so I was like dying in my bed, but I had started writing songs, and I was on the piano, and I was recovering at my parents' house, and and a voice, a friend of mine was like, "Oh, I'm releasing a record. Why don't you come down?" And like, my voice said, "Jump now and go to New York, or die in this bed." just start like a descent. And I was like, that's it, I'm out. And then I was back on my feet. Came to New York, stayed for like 6 months, the time I was permitted on my, as a tourist. And I ended up, was walking to buy some cat litter for my friend's cat, who I was cat sitting. And I wound up walking into this little corner, a jazz bar, and it's just like it's total Twilight Zone, Actually, I ended up calling the place the Twilight Zone after that. But it was a very magical spot. And I just sat there listening to them, and I was about to leave, and I just like thanked them, and they were like, "Oh, what? Come back and sing with us if you're a singer." Da, da, da. And so I stayed and I sang with them,
By
and
the
I
way,
left. And
you mentioned that that's what she does. She sings jazz.
well, not jazz anymore. I have to say, I haven't been singing jazz in the last couple of years because I've gone really completely back into my own music and my own production. But that was the beginning of those years. So when I went back, they were like, "Oh, you left and we didn't have a chance. We want to make a band for you and have you do like bi-monthly shows here." And I was like, "What?" I was like, "Great, sounds awesome," So that's what they did. These amazing people just put a band together for me. It was like, talk about Providence. Like that, I can't come up with a better example.
I know.
You
Wow.
know. And so the bass player, he's the one who ended up bringing me to the West Village, and I started to, hang out on that scene, and that ended up being another like big chapter for me. But not before I had gone back to Canada and ended up staying there for a few years and having a vintage clothing store, art studio, and then I came back to New York and was on the music scene in that capacity. And then, I drew certain conclusions. We were talking about it before about just being around a lot of people who had gone through the school system and who had kind of very precise notions of what music is, because you're in a stylistic environment. I'm in the jazz world, it's jazz. I mean, certain people's definition of jazz in a very specific way, and I was just like, I need to be freer. And life, when life pushes you away, take it as an invitation to your future and not a diss. Like I was like, basically, my intuition and the things that were occurring resulted in me finding a better home for what I was doing. I ended up at Club Coming in the East Village, being way more performative. I could climb up on pianos, I could sing upside down, I could, go crazy and have a lot of fun. If I had to like, tear off my shirt, I could do it. Whatever occurred to me, I didn't feel judged. I didn't feel that I was being was I doing the appropriate thing for the, whatever. It was just it was more performative, more fun, and more in line with what was art for me. But even then, I ended up, that was also a phase, and then the lockdowns happened and all that. And the lockdowns focused me back completely on my own art, and that has been a huge blessing for me. So in terms of music, but yes, all those years very, very about intuition. And then I developed my own oracle because I wanted different kinds of answers than the tarot. I didn't want to see dead people, and I didn't want swords, like, even though it's like, okay, I get this symbolic, but like still I don't want to see dead people in my tarot readings about what color shoes I should buy. But whatever,
Yeah.
great traditions.
So I would like to ask you a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
So let me see. Like, let's talk about art and what it is and what end.
Right. So I guess as we've been going through this, I brought it up a few times, what is art? I think art is a way of doing things, rather than an actual thing we do. uh, Everything can be done artfully. Anyone doing anything can do it with art. For me, art is alignment. Mm, um,
I
Art
agree.
is aligning yourself with like something, with something that feels like a more of a source, uh, something that is operating through you to maximize harmony. um, and even if that happens in a way that evokes, you have a lot of counter harmonious art, right? So you'll also have things that make you think by being disharmonious. But if that is there to then bring you into greater harmony, it's just like, I think it still applies. um but yeah, it's not because you're painting that you're an artist. You can be assembling something and you'll see three people assembling the same things, and one person will do it uh, with more alignment than another, potentially. Anything that you're doing, absolutely anything, your thought process, the way you make your tea in the morning, the way you walk, the way you dress, the way you speak, the way you consider yourself, the way everything can be done more and more artfully with more and more alignment. And I think that this is the thing, right? To make art your life, to make your way of living artful through attention. I guess it's like a growing consciousness that you can have a better quality of life in things that seem like small details, but that cumulatively create your entire existence. So uh, if we can do just one thing every day, or whatever, when it occurs to us to have a more harmonious life, or surrounding, yeah, you think it doesn't matter every time you open the cupboard and it's falling on your head. But what if it didn't? What if every time you open the cupboard, it was like felt good to look at? You know, this is going to have a huge impact on your subconscious mind, or whatever. And it will also reflect your subconscious mind back to you if it's falling on your face. But so yes. And then of course we have the arts, right? So this is the arts, and when we're talking about music, when we're talking about like visual, creation, things that are not necessarily have a purpose, like this cup is for me to drink out of, but this cup can also be a work of art. But things can also have no practical purpose and just be there uh, for harmony, but it still does have a practical purpose. But I think those arts are coming from us being instruments. We are the instrument, we are the arm of the creation. We are there to, whether it is create musical harmony with the creation, to bring beauty, to be a flower, or to make a flower, that could then give birth to an idea for someone, some other bee, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But I think that filtering this through the mind, filtering it through the institution, is where it starts to die. And also, I think that a lot of, I think that uh, from the artist having this spiritual conundrum of the material world, right? So you have a lot of artists that can't make a living. They're struggling because uh, they're not in this gallery, or they don't have this benefactor, or they haven't gotten the seal of approval from an institution, and so they're like not able to collect money, let's say. um I think this is a something to observe about society. When artists cannot make money, or cannot live, cannot sustain themselves, or cannot know providence, there's something there that's like a barometer of imbalance. where the artist is fragmented between the material world and the spiritual world. But to be an artist is to be in alignment, and to be in alignment is that connection with those invisible realms. So yes, you have to go through it, and if you think that it's going to be, and you don't have to learn anything or stand up for your principles or have deeper, well, then maybe you're not in alignment, and maybe you make things, but maybe it's not connected in such an artful way with that art. Not to say that people aren't connected regardless, I think we're all connected, but then there's a thing where the conscious comes into the connection, and there's like a conscious living of that connectivity. You have people who make beautiful art and that are connecting with people, and people are resonating with it, but there's something in the conscience that is that can be corrupted in a way. And I think a lot of institutions, as we know, like the CIA has, interfered very much with the arts in this country, for instance. Hollywood, all of these, powerful entities putting imagery in front of people and calling it art, but it is art, but it's being used in the wrong, it's being, well, again, in the wrong, I can't say that, because in the end, it's just how you perceive it. What's that?
Darker.
Yeah, like, let's say it takes a little bit more figuring out, but it is showing us what is. And I see a lot of, it's very interesting right now, because so many of these institutions that have been using art to forward agendas that are kind of pushing out of alignment as opposed to bringing towards alignment, or making alignment something more roundabout, let's say, are being exposed now as being sort of pushing for lies and pushing for censorship, pushing for control and of a narrative. But it's the artist that stays connected directly to source, that is willing to take the sacrifice to know the road of Providence, that is actually going to speak truth through what they're making. I think in the long run, those are the things that stand, and all the lies end up coming to light and things fall away. So it's like that search for the quick fix never really amounts to the legacy it hopes for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I feel like art for sure is, or can be, depending on the individual. Like for me, art is everything. It's just expression. It's just authenticity. It's connection, like you said. And for me, art is, I mean, again, it's everything. But for me, it's basically, for me, it's more stuff that comes from the heart, And not to say that art outside of the heart doesn't exist, because it does. That's, again, the darker aspect of it. That's manipulation, perhaps, used. So speaking of the darker version of art, let's talk about current times and the changing times and changing perspectives.
Right.
What do you have to say?
Well, I mean, we've all been going through this, and of course, we've all been going through this in our own very different ways. I mean, for me, it's been a very positive time. It's been a time where, where my intuition was confirmed with occurrence, where I was like, where also I understood what my values were and where I stood, because you need a context to figure those things out, and everything is a blessing because everything is a context, if you're willing to, or whatever, or if it's in your path to read things that way. For me, I guess I can't be happy in a world where I'm doing well and everyone's doing badly. Like that's not an answer for me. That's not a happy world, right? So I guess at the end of the day, you know, everyone has their own way of seeing that, right? Like, oh, you know, you know, you just I don't even, you know, we're so scared of even using certain words now. It's just like
Yep.
wild, you know.
I think we all know what's what.
Yeah, no, absolutely,
Getting
absolutely.
around.
But you know, it's like I guess when your freedom infringes on somebody else's freedom, it becomes something else, you know. When hmm, what to say.
Come on, feel
I
free.
guess
Say
what's
whatever.
that?
Feel free. Say whatever.
Yeah, so okay, well, at the beginning of all this, it was like, you know, as we talked about a little bit, a feeling of relief for me personally that the rat race was being paused, because things were escalating in a way that I was becoming very, very busy, but just like, yeah, like the hamster wheel had been sped up, but not like that was going to solve my problems. You know what I mean? It was just kind of going to make me busier. Um, and so I felt very relieved, and I also felt, you know, a voice in my head said the time has finally arrived, like as if my whole life has been preparing me for this moment,
I feel the
this
same way for
time.
myself. Yep.
What's that?
I feel exactly the same way for myself. The
Yeah,
hamster wheel stopped, and I've been training all these years and whatever other lifetimes, you know, like it's all it all came down to this point now forward.
absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely, yeah.
same.
And so you know, you don't realize the difference between you and others until there's something like foundational like this that occurs, and then you start to look around and you see how everybody is reacting and everyone is what their priorities are. You know, for me, my first priority was understanding what was happening, you
Same.
know, and looking beneath the surface at what was happening. And you know, I was just like glued to my phone, like researching, getting as many sources as I could, and you know, also feeling out what felt right and what didn't, you know. And my cards also, I did a reading. It was very interesting, actually. It showed the lockdowns. It was life is not personal, and it showed the lock with the timer on it. And life is not personal had people like social distancing with a sun that looked like a coronavirus. I was like, wow, okay. But that's really what it was. It was like, um, this is going to have a time period, and it's I think the social distancing, I felt extremely relieved. I was in the train, I was like, yes, stay 6 feet away from me. Can we keep this up forever?
Well, I saw the negative parts to it. For me personally, I felt the same way because you know people are too comfortable. Like, hey, just like
Yeah,
I
no,
need
definitely.
space. What?
Yes, we needed
Know each other.
space. We needed those 6 feet. You know, I think they set in some good habits, because yes, people were like a little bit like infringing on each other's boundaries. You know, you
Uh-huh.
see it like in clubs, you see it in the train, you see it's like, yo, back up, you know. And so that was kind of cool. And the time everybody needed that break, everyone needed that extended snow day, like everyone needed that. You know, I mean, I know it's been very hard for certain people. I know a lot of people went into full fear. They went into full, you know, paranoia media, and a lot of people lost their lives, you know, from the isolation, and that is tragic, you know. At the same time, I really do believe, after it being like a fundamental issue for me to understand what my core beliefs were when it came to free will and predestination, I do believe in destiny. I think free will is an illusion, though an incredibly fanciful one that is like fabulously contrived. But at the end of the day, I don't see any like, I don't understand it.
How
I
I
don't
view
understand.
free will, I feel the same way. How view free will, it's like, okay, here's a notebook, or here are two notebooks. You could choose the red one or the blue one. So like the little choices, sure, you have free will, but the grand scheme, this the actual story of your life, the big things, they're going to be predestined. So choose
Yeah,
one that you
and
don't
see, and that's what,
want.
I have an amazing tarot reader in Brazil. I haven't spoken to her in a few years, but she really helped me through a lot of the insecurity of the earlier years of my process. Well, from Brazil on, because things got really crazy. A lot of crazy things happened. But she also, she would say, there are some things that are like, but even the in-betweens, I can't see how we would have space to move on like a mathematical level. Like I don't know how that's done. So anyway, I had to make a choice because it was like the crux of a lot of my core beliefs, and at the end of the day I had to be like, well, I have to figure this out for myself. So um but anyway, so yes, I do believe that people have their time. I think that death is definitely predestined. I think that, so I do believe that it's not the end. So hopefully this was a positive release for people who had had enough,
Right.
and I can understand that too. And I think it's actually, I would never be a proponent of, ending one's life, but I think that if someone is at the point where they have that kind of courage, I mean, I wouldn't be able to do it. I don't think, I certainly wouldn't want to hurt my family, you know. But anyhow, that's a whole other discussion. But a reality in these times, especially, it really hit people very, very hard. And I think that if you don't have the perspective of like, making, a positive out of a challenge, it's going to be a lot more difficult. So if ever there was a good time to be a look on the bright side type of person, this was it. Um, so in the end, though, I was very, very shocked that things that were available and there was information was available online by very reputable people was being ignored or just not even searched for. That people were just really eating up the narratives of the sources that they were used to consuming without looking beneath the surface. I was surprised, to say the least. And then when the mandates came, I was absolutely shocked. I was absolutely shocked that the same people that, that were all about freedom of expression and my body, my choice, and this and that, and were all of a sudden the first ones to be like, show me your papers or you can't come in. You're against the greater good. And I was just like, okay, this is not the kind of math I know. I just became completely turned off. I just got turned off. There's no other word for it. Like, I was just like, well, I just don't even want to be there. Don't worry. Like, I'm not going to insist. I'm not going to try and get fake papers. I just don't want to be there. No,
Yeah.
that's not me at all. And then it kind of made me understand that all along, people had been in these mentalities, but I never had the context to see it. And now I had the context to see it, and I was seeing something that I never expected. But that was a blessing too, because I needed to know what was around me.
Absolutely.
It's like they will accept your help, but will they help you back? Will they listen? Will they understand? Or will they just go with the narrative because, I just want to get back to it. But it is gone. Get back to what? That world is no longer there. And why would you want it back? You know? So for me, this was really just like, it's been the birthing of a new era. It's the birth of a new world. For me, that's been understanding very clearly the impact of institution and how controlling it has become. And even if some things can start from a good intention, uh, can coerce people into bad behaviors. You know, people didn't understand that they were coerced, you know, into receiving this inoculation, if you want to call it that. This well, you know, they were coerced. I don't know a single person who was like, I want, well, you know, maybe certain people like my dad, who's older, you know, he just had a heart attack, you know, recently, and you know, I understand, like, yes, like you know, certain people, yes, but other people that really there was no medical requirement for them to be treated at all, and that they were even showing there was danger in receiving the treatments. They said, well, I did it because I wanted to go back to the bar. I didn't want to lose my job. Oh, I just wanted to be part of society. I wouldn't have done it. I'm upset with myself for having done it. I'm like, you were coerced. Do you know what that means? It's illegal. You were coerced. You know, but people, they don't even. So beyond yourself, this is the whole. So who through all these ages has been fighting for freedom? How did we acquire it? And how do we keep it? And it's really a case of, it's within you, you know, you stand up or you don't. And luckily there are enough people standing up, ironically, in my hometown, you know, right now, who are standing up and saying no. Like, we don't want this. This is crazy. I don't care how pretty your arts and culture section is. The politics that you're trying to make me buy are not art. You know, this is not harmony. This is not beauty. This is not alignment. This is vulgarity. This is trying to like separate and segregate populations. You know, this is obvious to me, you know, and to certain other people. And in a way, it allowed for me to find my like-minded folks, you know. And usually they'll be like on some low-key conversation because they don't want to talk about it in public. I'm like, do you realize you're afraid to speak? You know? Yeah. I'm like, no, I'm not hiding this. I don't want to hide who I am. I don't want to hide. You know, no. Yeah. I'm like, let's start conversations. Let's open each other's minds. Let's not hide from one another. I'd rather an argument than nothing. You know, so being awake, but very hopeful times, you know. Yeah. Like, I think a lot of beauty has come out of it. Yeah. And from being extremely true to myself, I feel that I have been rewarded, you know, with Providence, with like circumstances going in my favor, and for me being more true to myself and more focused on my own art and getting things finished, not being in bars and in nightlife, you know, actually getting to work and finishing my videos and wrapping up my songs. And, you know, I needed that. Life had to force me back into my studio, you know, so I'm all for it.
Yeah. So tell me about your creative projects and your brand, and you know, whatever else you would like to share that you've created that you would like people to check out.
Okay, yeah. So at the chapter where I was in Canada and started my own vintage clothing store, it just kind of happened. Really, a very close friend of mine, he's like, I have this commercial space that's really cheap that they just gave to me. He's the kind of guy who will like take things on like that. He's like very crazy. He used to have a bus that was a vintage clothing store, and now he has like taco restaurants, you know, et cetera, et cetera. He's a, you know, it's a courier company, but anyway, very free spirit and in business and etc. And I was like, well, I'll do a pop-up shop for the weekend, you know, and I've always been, you know, in thrift stores my whole life. Like, you know, I can go through my eyes closed and just touch fabrics and pull clothes, like, you know. So I had no money left. I was like, I have to do something. And I was just at my parents' place, like trying to figure out what was up. And so I went to, you know, a big thrift store out in Ottawa, and I put $500 on my credit card of things that I thought were cute and set up a weekend pop-up. And I was like naming the items that I was displaying, and I had this red beret and I called it raspberry beret, and then I was like, oh, that's going to be the name of my pop-up shop, raspberry beret, because he says, you know, the kind you find in a secondhand store, prints, etc. So that ended up lasting for almost 2 years, and by the end I was like, well, I guess I have to pay rent now, because like I invested this money and I'm selling stuff. But so I just ended up starting the store that way. And so that also gave me a moment, and I was not expected also. I could have seen that as a crisis, but again, it turned into an opportunity. And I had some time to be a little bit more sedentary, not like going around in my journeys. And I started making t-shirts. And in that period, right before that, I started painting again, and I had been going through that feeling of being excluded for being in my spiritual journey. You know, I was alone. You know, I was the only person like me around me. And it's not like you don't meet people and you have friends, but fundamentally I was in a journey by myself, you know, and that had been going on for many years. But at that point I felt, this was like around that Burning Man time that I was saying that, you know, sometimes the lack of like a financial stability is very disturbing for people. You know, it's probably one of the most frightening parts, and it's understandable, you know, but it's that's where I really felt that divide. And I had made a painting using my left hand, so I wasn't going to get the same old, you know, right hand wrote results I was getting. And I wrote exclusion, inclusion like 5 times, and in different letters in different directions. And when I wanted to put the brand together, I used those words, EXCINC. So it was X Inc. is exclusion, inclusion. And I put them together, and that ended up being the brand that I used for my t-shirts and for my art. And because I do so many things of music and video and painting, blah, blah, I didn't want to just be like, put my name everywhere. So I would just put that mark on everything that I do. And so, and I still do that. And that's, you know, what I do. Now I also have gotten into the world of decor through, again, you know, unexpectedly, providentially. And so that's on my decor stuff also. So this is it here.
Sweet. Yeah.
State of my nails. But yeah, so these are my oracle cards. So one of the things that I created, I guess
unless I'm wrong, I feel like you created this deck before the lockdown happened, right?
Yeah, I did. Actually, this is the second
makeup.
Yes. Oh no, you know, this comes from a song, and I have a video for it. I made this in 2015.
Wow.
So it's way before all this stuff. You know, I was like, I know. And then,
Was it,
you know,
any idea
everyone started
before or after we met? Because I feel like we met into
before. This
okay.
was during the years at the store. So 2015, you and I probably met in 2017 or 18.
No.
Probably 2017.
Because
I came back to no, sorry. This is from 2013 probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I came back to New York in 2015.
There we go. That's when we met. Yeah.
Yeah. So we probably met in like 15, 16.
Yeah.
Wow. So yeah, so this is even older than that, you know. So I was like, I know now everyone's just gonna think that I'm like another of these million people saying wake up. But seriously, wake up though. Of course everyone's saying it.
You know, it's funny, I'm going through my poetry. I'm going to be releasing a poetry book, which it's funny. I was going through it and I'm like, holy shit, this is Ascension poetry. You know, it's just like stuff like frustrations or stuff to inspire people. And then looking over it, you know, and I'm like talking about wake up and this and that. I'm like, again, this whole like being prepared for this period, it's so to me, you know, mind blowing how this works out. Wow.
Absolutely. And all the things that all the rabbit holes that I fell into, like in like, you know, in the year like in 98, 97, you know, were all things that are again have come back up now that I'm just like, oh my God, like wow, you know. So yeah, the oracle, the first one I made, I thought I was going to make a deck of my own cards, like of just tarot cards. Um, I didn't know. I just knew that I actually at the time I was so broke that I wanted to buy new cards because I'd given them all away at Burning Man as my like, gift thing. I would just get everyone to pick a card and I would give them like a little. And so I went to the shop. There's a crystal and card shop close to Union Square. So I went back there and I was like, I'll get another deck, but I didn't have enough money. I only had enough for this one deck that was blank. And so I was like, okay, well that's it. And I bought it.
Wow.
And again, thinking that I was going to make my own like regular tarot. But then I started to get these phrases coming into my mind, and I was like, they kept coming, and I started to write them down. Then I was like, oh, this is what I have to put on the cards. And that was also after discovering the Doreen Virtue angel answers. I had been in Venice and bought a set of those, and I was like, oh, I like this oracle thing. It's like more of a sentence that comes out. Though that deck is kind of like it's more like yes, no, in 2 weeks, in 3 weeks. It's just kind of more stuff like that. But I like that idea, And so I made my first deck, and it happened again. Like I had this gold pen, and once I ran out of ink, I started to have to use other colors because I couldn't afford to buy another gold pen. And it ended up color coding the deck and like things I could never have planned and I could never have done if it hadn't been for the restrictions. The restrictions ended up being key in so many instances in my life.
Isn't it
I guess
interesting?
if my intuition
Created through you. It just like created through you, just like all these things I want
yes,
to share.
totally. It was just like opening a faucet and like, oh, stuff coming out. And then even when I ran out of cards, like they still were trickling through and I was like, I have no more cards. So I made a second deck, which is this one that I ended up printing. Also, the second one, I made it to be a little bit more, or I knew when I was, because again, it came out in one single night after a dear friend died. I was like, okay, it's time. And I just like automatic writing in one sitting, the whole deck. But I knew it had to be a little bit more cutting. Like people needed a harder slap in the face in a way that they would understand rather than it being so kind of philosophical like the first deck is. So there's our reading. But yeah, so with this one right away, I scanned it and I made an Instagram filter with it. So you can give yourself a 1-card reading because I didn't know how to make apps. So I was like, when I found out you could make filters, I did that. And then I printed it up and have been reading with this one. That's what I made the Wake Up Oracle channel on Instagram with. But and my tarot reader told me, she's like, one day you won't need the cards, and she was kind of laughing. And it's true that now I've been more just speaking, but the cards were most useful in the times where my intuition and my reality were very separate. And it was very, and I needed that extra guidance that was coming from, my higher self, I guess, something very intimate to me, not just searching, even though you can, you just have to think something and it comes up on your phone now, but literally, but
Sure.
but that's what my cards were really great for. They were guides through uncertain times. So and like we were speaking, also I don't use them as much as I did. Just really when I hit things where I think maybe I'm at odds with myself and I want to reconnect with my higher vision, or things that I really am like, okay, well, what do I need to know in this situation or whatever. But I don't use them as much as I used to. Yeah, for sure. And other than that, I'm working at finishing a bunch of my music and productions that I've been working on over the years, and making music videos as, again, in a very, the footage comes to me and like, things weave themselves together. Unplanned seems to be the only way. And planning an art show for May and hoping that I can release all this stuff then.
I would like to come.
Well, yes, I hope so. You'll definitely be invited. Yeah. So yeah, and decor has been so I decorate for like parties, DJ booths. They're really like ceremonies, I've also done full venues, lounge, restaurants, installations. But doing the parties, like so parties, I mean like you have DJs and a room and it's set up and you set up, tear down. These I really, really feel are like staging ceremonies, like making altars where the DJs can come and the people reunite and creating a good energy for all that to happen. And that's been a blessing in my life, definitely. It allows me to be very physical in my creativity. It's very finite, whereas with my music, I can just be like so nitpicky that like it'll take me like 10 years to release something, but with this, it's like it's on and it's off. Like there's no, you can't do any of that, so that's good. So yeah.
Awesome. So one more question before we go.
Okay.
So what, in your opinion, is New Earth, and how do we go about having it materialize, or whatever your version of
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, I think that the new earth has always been here. I think it's new to us, uh, but it's not new.
Right.
That's what I believe. I think that it's more like just like stepping over into like an alternate timeline or something like that. Um, I think that our perceptions and our reality, everyone's is so different. And if there was ever an opportunity to see that, it has been these times that we're in now. Like we're not living on the same planet. We're just not,
We're all
you
living
know,
in different place, in different dimension, technically, different perception, different world.
absolutely. And
Absolutely.
in like every conceivable way, so it's just like in that sense, the live and let live, there's no reason not to, because there's the creation is for everyone in its own way.
Yeah.
Of course, there are some things that can't be sustained, like the disconnection from the earth. I mean, if till people decide they want to be cyber linked and whatnot, um, and maybe what we are living now is already a version of that. We just don't know it, because we have no idea what we are, who we are. But I think that the connection with the planet is definitely something that I would not want to lose, like, you know, this is like, a lot of my decor is with the natural things. Like there is nothing as harmonious. It is art, our nature is the gold standard for art and harmony and beauty. It's where everything stems from. I think that how wonderful to just spend a lifetime beholding its miracles as opposed to trampling on it and destroying it.
Yeah.
But if that's what it takes to appreciate it and stand with it, because we always have to lose to realize what we have, it's kind of part of our nature also, it seems. um, then so be it. But I'm hoping that, in my view, for something to work on this planet, it has to be in line with this planet. This planet's job is not to harmonize with us. It's the other way around. So I think things should begin with the principle, the starting point being, how does this gel with the earth? Before anything is taken, there's any action taken on anything. Because the crux of it is now, that because of trying to dominate other humans and the monopolies, and you have all this madness with the oil industry, that is just like, I mean, it's a problem just waiting to be another problem. There's no solution there at all. And there's so much bad faith. But I mean, what can this be other than unbelievably traumatized people, who need nothing more than to be healed by the earth? So it's just like how that's going to happen, I think, is going to be the beauty of the ride. And I look forward to seeing it. I don't want to come up with a plan to make it. I just want to be present in my perspective to behold it as it does happen. The earth wins.
Yeah.
Hands down every time. Love wins hands down every time. It's just spoiler alert.
Light always wins. And I feel like part of this series, the Ascension Stories, I feel like that's me collecting individuals, those individuals that are going to help return people back to themselves.
Right.
You know, whether through art or some kind of, other healing modalities, just like wonderful people like yourself who just, we are the way.
And really it's not, I think there's a non-interference that is helpful. It's just like, we don't need for people to like, convince one another. Even though that's the reaction, and I've had it, and I've been like, I want you to see what I see, don't you see, like, et cetera, et cetera. But in the end, it's just being who you are. It's being what you are, and letting that emanate and show itself and be a solution of itself. It's like where there's no problem, that's already a solution. So try, not to be a problem, and also to know how to not bring problems onto yourself. Right? It's just awareness and consciousness. So when it comes to like this but maybe more like tangible terms, I think that the new earth is going to look like less institution, less interference, and individuals taking more responsibility for themselves, and in a way that makes them feel good and return, and that is empowerment. No one, it's like you realizing you've been walking with crutches your whole life and not even knowing it, and then the crutches get thrown away and you're like, I can walk. It's like, wait a minute, I thought I was walking the whole time, but you weren't. It's just getting that, like, oh, okay, oh, this feels so good, like how it feels when you finally are financially independent, you can pay your own way. Not that you're not going to be like, oh no, I'm working. You're going to be like, oh my God, I feel so amazing because I'm autonomous. Like, it's just this whole notion that what feels good is being lazy. It's just like, that's going to go out the window as people feel more inspired and become healthier. Like we have to, this modified food and all this garbage, like, okay, we've gone far enough in this fragmentation to see that it doesn't work.
It's time to integrate. Oh my God.
And then, and understanding that all this has been necessary. It's been a voyage, it's a necessary voyage, but like people aren't buying it anymore. And I think even the people who are perpetuating it, they're not even convinced anymore because it's too much trouble, And
it's gone crazy.
It's just a hassle. Yeah. It's just,
it went a little too far. Just like, okay. All right. Let's time to melt some stuff.
This isn't going over the way it used to. How come people are catching on? Oh, that's kind of a bad look. But like you see it, right? It's like all of a sudden it's like, whoa, all this stuff is so tasteless. Like, how did we ever fall for this? Like just,
like, for example, drinking a shitload every day.
Right.
We used to think that was normal.
Yeah, right. Like, why not? Why do it's like, what, a hangover? Like, oh my gosh, what a waste of a day. Like, think of all the things I didn't do. Yeah.
I would drink and then I would hang over the next day and then repeat.
Hair of the dog.
I tried not to, like, because that's like going a little further than I wanted to go, so I tried not to. So like I just suffered. Because like I just didn't want to go too far.
Right. I mean, we have to have our experiences, and go and like that. That's also why I like psychedelics, because you get to have these experiences that of alternate perspectives. Just to know an alternate perspective takes the solidity out of your daily one. It just opens it up to possibility. Yeah, it's like anything could happen. It's like, oh wow, that tree just turned into a whole bunch of eyes. And all of a sudden that's possible. And why not? Just like, break the limitations in your mind and allow for the creation to keep expanding in ways we could never have imagined. I think we're just going to see more and more of that. I think it's the beginning of good times.
So my perception of the topic of New Earth. So I feel like what the perception, like, that it's a perception, as we mentioned, and that it's basically an expanded awareness to where you're including your heart, because we're usually just up here. But once you use this, your awareness expands, and we're all on the same plane, technically, right? The same planet, but we're experiencing life differently. So like somebody that's living from here with the expanded awareness that they have, this is a different energy center. You're experiencing life through here. So what I say is that the portal to New Earth is in the heart. That's it. That's it. We could be in the same room and have a different reality completely. Because I could be enjoying the pretty colors over there, and the other person that's just here, they're like, so? And I'm just like, well, I'm having a really good time. And, and you're miserable. So who's better off? I'm just saying.
Right. But again, like everybody in their own timeline, and in their own like predestined journey, I guess it's funny because like the actual, it's there's no shortcuts, and a shortcut is actually code for a long cut. Like it's actually a detour.
Yeah.
So it's like I think
afterwards, yeah,
you have to go backwards, but you had to learn that. So in the end, really, it's just like it is what it is, but I think that like the more we can extrapolate from the small things, from the microcosm in our life, from the like little, even I don't know, the way you prepare your food, or the way anyway, there's always something to learn. You're like, oh, it's easier if I do it this way. It makes more sense if I do this way. Oh, if I just like follow the whatever. And we apply those same principles, all those same small realizations, we can apply them in like more macro ways. It's all built on the same system. That's what's the beauty of this world. It's like I can learn something in this department and translate it to that department, because it's all the same law. When you start like creating like new laws and like confusing people with lies and etc., of course it's very hard for people to find their way out of the maze. So I would just count on things personally, that you can, and it doesn't have to be complicated. Actually, quite the opposite. It's usually the simple things that give you the biggest clues. It's just making a small thing and turning it into its equivalent in another area, and decoding and giving privilege to that, and intuition, that is your best friend and your guide, just developing that. And like you said, the heart, it's like, that's there are even studies showing, did you see that one? It's like they were showing slides to people, and they had like receptors. It was showing that even before they saw it, they had already seen it,
right,
like with their heart or something.
Quantum field. There was
right.
like we only experience time and physical reality, but the quantum field, it's basically all one dot, right? It's all one thing. So why would you not have precognition, right? Even in a subconscious level. So yeah, of course your heart will react, because what was the past, was the future. You're just not aware of it.
Right. Yeah.
Conscious mind. Yeah. So if I was to ask you for a piece of advice for the world, what would come to mind? What would flash
a piece of advice? Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Or in your mind or in your heart?
Really, like one thing that I actually have been, I have become conscious of recently is, if you don't know something, admit that you don't know something.
Right.
Because I realize that sometimes out of habit, I'll be like, oh yeah, because I'd heard or was familiar, but it's not really knowing. I'm like, no, you can't stop doing that because you need to know.
Right.
And if you think you already know or you pretend you know, you're never gonna know. So like removing the ego out of that stuff, that's been like a personal, one of my recent personal becoming conscious that I had this habit sometimes. And but I think really being true to oneself, just like, take the time to look away from others and what they're saying and what they're thinking, and of being influenced and just going like, well, but what do I think? What do I feel? Like, even as an exercise, you could go through like the different versions of you that have existed over your lifetime. What would that part of me, what would I have thought then? What would I have thought then? What would I have thought then? Just exploring really, really to know where you stand, and not, trying to cultivate the strength to have an independent view outside of others.
Yeah.
Because until you do that, you're never going to be on your own journey. And that's where it all starts, is when you put your foot onto that path that is only yours. It might be a couple of footprints, but it's not like the highly treaded highway. And then to go onto your unique journey, like we all have to embrace what is unique in us, and once we do that, it will be that much easier for us to embrace what's unique in everybody else, and really have a diverse appreciation for life. And acceptance, so it's, and also like to give yourself a break. Like, yeah, I get impatient and I get angry, and I like, am the beast that I am, and I have to deal with that, and sometimes I have to go away into my cave and vent so I can come back as like a well-balanced Libra into the world, but I'm gonna hang in my Scorpio zone for a minute before I can turn that page, turn that leaf. So just like, getting comfortable with our own duality, not beating ourselves up for being in that duality, not judging yourself based on things, and doing what feels right to you. Just be yourself.
Yeah, I feel like I try to give the message of like, it's okay, like no matter what it was that like you did, like you messed up somehow, it's okay. Don't have, let's say, shame or guilt. I don't think that's the way to go. It's what can I learn from this? What can I do better the next time? Why go down, into a hole that's gonna make you repeat the same thing over and over again? Why not just like, what can I learn from this? How can I not do that again?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for joining and giving us your beautiful story of such grand adventure.
Yes, I hope I didn't ramble too much.
No, it's great. I loved it. I thought my story was vast. No, you like yeah. No, you really enjoyed life, I'm gonna say.
Well, I'm going to tell you that it was not all enjoyable. And like I said, like it's incredibly colorful. It makes for great stories, and like I can pick like the best memories, but it was very hard. It was tough. I suffered emotionally a lot. My relationships were very difficult. And I'm glad that I am where I am now. I would say also to people who are like going through the process that it does get better.
Yes.
It really does, and like don't give up. It's hard, and it's supposed to be hard, and it's as hard as it is deep. So if you're on a really, really deep journey, it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
But guess what, you're doing the work, and you should be incredibly proud of yourself. So yeah,
wisdom is gained,
yeah.
and that's how we become sages, basically.
Yeah, well,
It's not fun.
We have sage moments.
But just kind of in retrospect, like for myself personally, as much of a horror show of where I came from, I would not have it any other way, because how would I be the person I am today?
Right, exactly, right.
I'm totally a-okay with all of it. What made me
Yeah,
who I am today. My
amazing.
ability to hold space the way I can is thanks to my past. Love
Yeah, and I think that like as more people, you know, go through these experiences and start to understand the value of the darkness, you
it.
know,
Yeah.
all of the information, the wisdom that is occulted in what we consider to be untouchable, depression, dark thoughts, anything like that. These are areas that we must know to be wise. You can't just be like, oh, I'm just in the light. No, that's not how it works. We're
Bypassing.
in we're in what's that?
It's called bypassing.
Right. I
Reality,
mean,
bypassing reality. Reality is yin and yang. There is no just yang or just yin.
absolutely, they support one another, they feed into one another, they are one another,
We are
and
why physical reality exists. If it wasn't for the tension of the opposites, we couldn't have this. There's just
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And when that becomes more understood, and it has been over time, but even in the way that in medical treatments and in like psychological, in ways of saying the return of shamanism, but not in like a hokey kind of pretend way, but in the sense of everyone connecting to that in themselves, their own inner guide that leads them. And it's like, yeah, maybe you're supposed to do this drug, and maybe you're supposed to like, fall down this rabbit hole, and maybe yeah, and no one's there to judge that. No one should be there to impede your process of going into your own darkness, um, though we can support one another through that, so that it still is fruitful and not just the end of your journey. You know what I mean? And it does take a strong mind. I'm not going to say it's for everybody, but if you can go and come back every time, you're going to be stronger. So value the darkness and value the light. You know,
The full picture,
surf.
guys.
Become a good surfer.
Yeah.
It's know the right tension and catch the waves. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
All right, my love. Yeah, once again, thank you so much for coming on. I'm gonna put your info in the show notes. And yeah, I'll see you hopefully in a few months when you're doing your art show.
Yes, you absolutely will, and hopefully a little bit sooner if we can meet up. Thank you so much for having me, and let's keep chatting.
Thank you, thank you. Bye.
Ciao.
See you guys next time.